course, that his mana had increased, but he didn't think a new technique would appear. A red flame technique that only members of the Arden family who have passed through the cycle stage can use. If you mix this with a basic technique, no way, he can't stop him with just a sword anymore. Then he struck his blow, and the protagonist looked at it and, gritting his teeth, swung the weapon, screaming loudly. Fulton thought in surprise, what? He cut his sword aura, but he deliberately put a large amount of mana into this blow so that it dodged. After this, the protagonist smiled and said that this blow was a good decision, and in the end, he had to stop his basic technique. Fulton smiled and thought, this Duke, how much has he grown in such a short period? Then he said, the Duke, he thinks that now he will have to fight with all his might, like in a real duel. Naturally, if he allows it. He replied that he always agrees. After some time, Lawrence said, here's the strategic plan for Baron Romanton. MC read the contents and said, not bad. Even the king can't object to this. She said that she has already prepared everything, he just needs to go and have his say. Just that? He asked. Just that? She said, they say the head of the knightly order has reached 5-star level. Perhaps we should gather some more forces, just in case. He smiled in response, folded his arms, and said he thought there was no need to worry about that. As soon as she finished, she should go to a safe place and wait there. All the combat knights would accompany her. Meanwhile, the protagonist and his escort rode on, and the residents were surprised. What was going on? Was it really tax collection again? After that, MC climbed to the hill and thought, the ruler of these lands, like Kargas, is squeezing every drop of blood out of the common people. Both adults and children are in a terrible state. Their faces are filled with fear and suffering. Then he held up a document and shouted for them to listen, the residents of Polaris. They must already know the news about Baron Kargas. Under the patronage of the royal palace, he came to personally inspect the situation in these lands. If he finds Baron Romanton violating this agreement, he will be punished according to the laws of the duchy. So, Elder, he has to answer something. Is Baron fulfilling his duties conscientiously? At this point, the elder spread his hands to the side and awkwardly said, does he understand? The thing is. At this moment, the villagers began to mutter, punish the Baron? Is this true? Is this possible? If they protest too much. The next second, the man raised his hand and shouted, Duke, they want to bring the Baron to justice. He is taking too many taxes from them. The others began to support him. Right. He must be punished. That's right. Because of him, their life is like hell. They have nothing left. He must help. He must save them, Duke. The protagonist shouted. Good. He heard their opinion. Then he walked forward and shouted. He, Ethan Arden, swears on the name of his family that he will punish the Baron. If they know of his crimes, if they have any evidence of the deeds of Baron Romanton, they must bring it to him. After some time, MC took the book and said that she was well prepared. He looked at Lawrence and asked, is this the secret organization? She stood next to him and said, yes, it worked out quite well. If he visits 2 or 3 more villages, she thinks he can gather enough evidence. Then he jumped on his horse and said, great, let's go. After a while, Shimon asked, Hans, is this true? He stood opposite him and answered, yes, he just heard from a spy. The Duke attacked Baron Romanton's estate today, and Lugon knows absolutely nothing about it. Shimon slammed his fist on the table and shouted, well done, Hans. He must send a man there immediately so that Lugon doesn't hear about these rumors. Then he smiled and thought, we'll see, Lugon. Would he be able to act so brazenly when the Duke deprives him of his subordinates? Even if the Duke loses, he will still depose him from his position, forcing him to answer for all this. He laughed and thought that he didn't expect everything to turn out so well. Sometime later, the Romenton estate, the city of Uldren. The protagonist walked forward, but Romenton stood before him with his subordinates. He laughed and asked, Duke, what he had come to see him about. He should have at least warned him in advance. After that, the protagonist threw him the report and said, enough chatter. Does he know what this is? He would like to hear his explanation. And Romenton said, of course he knows what it is. He put his foot on it and asked, did he get this in that village before coming here? He thinks he should visit these villages after he deals with him, Duke. Then he looked at Merlin and shouted that it was his turn now, Chief. And he laughed, reaching for his weapon, and said, Duke, whether he is stupid or too insolent to come here alone, did he think they would tremble in fear of him? Although out of respect for his status, he may not fight at full strength. In response, the protagonist grinned and, reaching for his sword, said that they were even worse than Kargas. Is that all he wants to tell him? Merlin laughed loudly and said, how self-confident. He knows he's proud of his lineage, but will he still think the same when he sees his abilities in person? He swung his sword, which surprised MC. Merlin laughed and asked, so what did he think? Ethan remained silent, and Merlin asked, did he seem to like his greeting? He had ever seen a real fight. MC thought how impudent he was. He was acting too hastily. The order rang out. Wait, Sir Merlin. Romenton asked the Duke to forgive him for his rudeness, but he wouldn't have listened to him otherwise. He thinks they've just become convinced of the difference in their abilities. Would he like to hear his proposal? He spread his arms in different directions and said that after he hears it, he'll definitely change his mind. They don't need to fight. He thinks he's misunderstood something because his real opponent is Count Shimon, namely the warlord Kargas, who banished him to the outskirts when he was in a coma. He is in Count Lugon's faction, so he is on hostile terms with them. Based on the above, he has a proposal for him that he will like. So he thought, he is simply speechless. First they point their sword, and now they talk about an offer? He asked, and what kind? Romenton ordered him to trust their faction. If he takes their side, no one will be able to stop them. And then, they will tear Count Shimon, who is tormenting him, to pieces. And he guarantees his safety. MC laughed, and Romenton asked discontentedly, "What's funny?" Ethan said, "It seems he has completely lost fear, even forgotten about shame. That's their specialty. Pathetic idiots, right?" He cried out. Zifron Romenton. How can he guarantee his safety? He is just some vassal. He has no interest in their dirty squabbles between factions. The elders who betrayed their ruler are his enemies. They must all be brought to Arden's court. Romenton screamed, "What? Yes, he is." Mana shot toward him, and Merlin jumped up and shouted, "Baron, there's no need to listen to him anymore." He swung his sword, but MC blocked it. Merlin said the secret of Kargas's capture has been revealed. He bribed Menharten and captured Helmet. Maybe he came here with the same intentions? Merlin swung his sword and asked. He fell into a coma, then woke up, and still thinks the laws of the duchy apply here? Romenton clenched his fist and thought, Kargas, what an idiot. He thought he'd gotten old and couldn't keep track of his people anymore, and then here comes such a specimen. But on the other hand, his order is loyal to him. It will never fall apart. MC thought mockingly, Lawrence did a good job. He didn't think he knew so much. If the neighboring lands falsified information like that, then there's nothing to say about the rest. Iron shifted, and Merlin asked in surprise, looks like he felt his power? His smile irritates him. MC said, well, that's the end of the joke. Merlin cried out, Duke! Mana clashed, and at that moment, Marie was sitting in a chair and saying, she doesn't even know if it's okay for her to sit here and drink tea when Ethan could be in danger. Prexian laughed and said, no need to worry about him. The Duke was able to easily defeat Kargas. Count Romenton may be stronger than Kargas, but this time he rode with knights. Marie responded, but Ethan, with his character, won't stand by and watch his subordinates fight. Prexian said, after her words, he now feels like he can fight alone. Fulton laughed and said, he doesn't think the Duke will leave a scratch. Everyone looked at him carefully, and he said he is no longer someone the Baron's men can handle. He tried to fight him and can swear to it on his honor as a knight. At that moment, Merlin was sitting by the wall, surprised, wondering what happened. He was behind him and was already ready to win. Maybe his sword accidentally hit him? Romenton screamed. Mayor Merlin, sir! He frowned and thought, such humiliation in front of his subordinates. What a nightmare. What a shame. Romenton waved his hand and asked why they were standing there. Let them help him quickly. Merlin clutched his sword and ordered everyone to back off. He is fine. However, Count, he asks for his understanding. He was covered in mana and screamed. He is unable to control his power, so he can kill the Duke. Romenton laughed and said, wow, that was not in his plans. Merlin's loud cry was heard, the call of a swift sword. He covered himself in mana and swung his sword, using absolute chaos. Romenton said with a slight mockery, it seems Sir Merlin lost his temper a little. The repairs will cost a lot. He'll have to collect taxes again. Merlin looked at his sword and thought, he dodged. He can't feel it. He asked, where was he hiding, rat? He turned around and saw Ethan, who hit him in the face with his hand. He kicked him and threw him aside, and then stepped on his chest. Merlin thought, how is this possible? MC bent down and said, he will tell him one thing. Merlin thought, what power? He can't move. MC remembered his words and attacked, after which a loud scream was heard. Romenton said, there was some loud sound. What is going on? He ordered Sir Merlin to answer. Did he deal with the Duke? MC said, he doesn't think he can answer now. He threw his corpse towards them, and Romenton screamed in fear. What is that? He looked at the body and asked, Merlin, this can't be. Deputy, what's going on here? Let him answer at least something quickly. He looked around and asked, weren't there 30 knights here? He ordered to stop the Duke immediately. The girls squeezed the sword and said not to relax. She ordered to prepare for an attack and show the techniques they had been practicing. She ordered to surround the Duke. They will avenge the leader. MC looked at them and thought, the level is quite low. He won't even have to use the red flame. The girls screamed, all knights, attack. Ethan thought, with such weaklings he will have to control his strength. He screamed and swung his sword, activating a stream of fire. He thought, there is no point in killing ordinary knights. There is not a single one among them who emanates an evil aura. But the one who really wants to kill him, there is only one here. He looked at the girl, who widened her eyes at him in fear and began to shake. He passed by her and said, he not only imposed inflated taxes and sucked all the juices out of the inhabitants, but also came at him with a sword to cover up his violations, and this is a rather serious crime. According to the laws of the duchy, from this moment on, he is deprived of his title and all his fortune. Zifron Romenton. He screamed in fear, fell to the ground and looked around, asking why they were doing nothing. There were 200 guards here. He looked at them and ordered them to attack him immediately. He was nothing. Romenton waved his hand and shouted, what idiots! What is he paying them for? Their master is not Arden, but he. Let them obey his orders. The knights looked at him, and throwing their weapons on the ground, said, their troop cannot obey such orders. How can they raise a sword against a hero and savior? Moreover, their salaries are paid to them from the taxes of their families, which they collect unfairly. Romenton thought in fear, what a nightmare. So, all his stupid mutterings were addressed not to him but to them. This Duke, he is a terrible man. He has military might, authority, and also the ability to influence the people. And why doesn't anyone notice this? MC said, "This is the end, Zifron Romanton." He hit him with his fist, causing Romanton to scream loudly. He fell to the ground, and Ethan told the warriors to listen to him. He wants to express his gratitude to them for not raising their swords against him and his family. As they had already heard, he had visited other cities before coming here, and he promised that he would put an end to the Baron's despotism. From this very moment, he, Ethan Arden, takes all power from the Baron. He screamed, and he declares that from now on this land will be under the direct control of the duchy. They will get freedom. The knights knelt and shouted. They obey his instructions. Glory to the Duke. Glory to Arden. After a while, MC said, "Well done." He found the second part. Did the Baron tell her everything? Lawrence said yes. They have the king's seal, and given Helmut's case, it wouldn't be difficult. He asked for mercy in exchange for answering all the questions. MC said mercy. It depends on what he says about this book. Lawrence asked again. A book? Ethan said he found it in Romenton's office, called the Sacred Book of Dragons. He ordered her to go and interrogate him again. He needs to find out how it fell into his hands. The Sacred Book of Dragons? One must praise the dragon god, then it gives strength to those who worship it. One must study the scriptures, and may the protection of the dragon god be with them. MC thought. He knew it. This is a book on mana breathing techniques. That dark mage he met in the abandoned mine, judging by the description, this is weaker than his techniques, but this talks about the same breathing techniques. However, this method has very serious side effects. The technique is mixed with the dragon-human breathing technique, but instead of a vessel, mana is collected in the heart. This way, one can quickly ascend, reaching the level of 4 stars, and as a result, a heart rupture occurs, which is fatal. He placed his hand on the book and told them to come in. Sylvia opened the door, and Ethan asked if she'd managed to find out anything. She replied, yes, she'd gotten information not only from the Baron, but also from ordinary citizens. The book is connected with the order he spoke of. It seems they used this to lure people in. MC said, using the book as bait. Exactly. People were unaware of the side effects of this breathing method, obsessed with power, so it was easy to lure them in, unless they harbored hostility towards the dragon race. What do ordinary people think of dragons? Would they really easily trust this method? Lawrence replied that wars usually harm ordinary people first. Even with the non-aggression pact, the dragon race became an object of hatred. That's why, when this book was first discovered, there were frequent requests from the residents for this order to be destroyed. However, the aristocrats ignored their pleas, and those who spoke out loud soon even began to disappear. Thus, with their silence, they allowed lawlessness to occur, while the people simply whispered in corners and could do nothing. Ethan spoke thoughtfully. He thought the Guardian and the interests of both sides were involved, so Zifron acted alone after what happened to Helmut. Lawrence replied, yes, Zifron, on the contrary, seemed to be against it. Some time ago he shouted loudly, he has nothing to do with this. These idiots, he has nothing to do with that terrible order, Naraxis. MC repeated, Naraxis. Lawrence replied, yes, that's what he said, Naraxis. What's the problem? Ethan answered no, none. He thought, the one who changes appearance. The embodiment of lies, Naraxis. Not all representatives of the dragon race had the same abilities. They tormented people with their special skills. Among them was one called the Shaper. They could take the form of a person, a plant, or an animal. They are very annoying. To recognize such a disguise, you need to be at least a knight of the 7 stars or higher. Even he had to play hide-and-seek with Naraxis for about a year to deal with him. Now, a non-aggression pact has been concluded, but it is unknown how many years he hid in the duchy. After all, the dragon could have taken the form of some aristocrat. Then the situation could become even more serious than in his past life. He stood up and said, Lawrence, this is a rather urgent problem. The book couldn't have spread on its own. He took his jacket and said, there must have been someone who transported this. He needs to personally find out who the transporter was. After a while, a man sat at the reception and said, they're closed. Let them come next time. He said irritably, what's wrong? The man slammed his hands on the counter and screamed. He said they were closed. Let them come next time. At that moment, the door shattered into pieces, and the man's eyes widened in surprise. Ethan said finally the door opened. The man asked, who was he? What was he doing? The guy ran up to him and said, nothing, nothing. He'll explain everything. MC entered the room, and the man asked, what? And who was he? They finished sales for today. Did he want to die? Ethan saw a book in his hand and said, vile merchants who have forgotten their past and sell the power of dragons, and the idiots who happily buy it. What a sight. The man screamed. What did he say? He came and interfered with their business, and now he's still babbling something? The man started flexing his fists and asked, is he trying so hard so they'll finish him off? Another man said, well, they'll fulfill his wish. MC walked past them and told them to move aside. He had no business with them. Someone said, he's just a joke. The man clenched his fist and screamed, but they have business with him. What will he say to this? MC tensed his jaw and punched the man in the face. He said displeasedly, he won't repeat it twice. Let them get lost. The other men answered, yes. They headed for the exit and asked to be forgiven. Ethan went to the main one, who screamed loudly in fear. He pressed himself against the wall and asked, who is he? Why did he come and bother them here? If he doesn't get out of here right now, he will call security. Doesn't he know that causing a riot is a serious crime? MC grabbed the hilt of his sword and ordered him not to make him laugh. He was yelling with such an insolent face. How dare he sell a book praising dragons on the territory of the Duchy of Arden? He thinks he knows that this is tantamount to a mortal sin. The man thought fearfully. The territory of the Duchy of Arden? Could he really be Duke Ethan? MC held a sword to him and said, if he doesn't want to die, let him answer where these books were made. After a while, the man said, he was just selling books that were sent from the order. He himself doesn't know the details. MC said, there are probably other places where books are distributed. Does he know anything about them? The man replied, people from the order check everything very carefully. He doesn't know if this information is accurate or not, but he heard that there's another point in the estate of Viscount Deccan. After a while, Ethan walked through the forest and thought, the estate of Viscount Deccan. It is near the lands of Kargas. He thinks he has decided on his next target. Ethan said, this seems to be the place the merchant mentioned. He entered the cave and looked around. He thought, there is no magic circle with an alarm, not even sentries. This means they have been doing their business here for a long time and they are confident in complete safety. He simply has no words for how annoying this is. He looked out and saw the guys talking to each other. The guy asked, so what did he do? The knight asked again, what do you mean? He threatened him lightly, and he immediately pulled out the money. He took it and sent him to the next world. The guy frowned and said, he knows what. No matter how much the priest covered for him, such things shouldn't be done often. The guard smirked and asked again, who's going to tell him what? The order practically rules this world already. Where can you find such an idiot? Suddenly, there was an order to shut up. MC came out and ordered him to shut his dirty mouth. He was so disgusted that he couldn't listen to it anymore. The guards shouted in displeasure, who is he? Where did he come from? MC said he didn't think they needed to know because they were going to die soon. He couldn't even believe that such words could be said by people. Was there really not a drop of guilt in them? The guy asked. What? He doesn't remember having any visitors scheduled for today. The guard asked. Idiot, doesn't he get it yet? Someone reported them, and this is a mercenary. The guy asked again. Really? That's good. He was just bored. He sent mana through his body and sword and screamed. Judging by his appearance, he was a knight. Well, he asked for it. MC frowned and thought, is this the same mixed breathing technique? He asked. Have they already forgotten about the war between dragons and humans? The guy asked again. What? Ethan said, not only have they mastered the dragon breathing technique, which killed so many people, but now they use it to kill innocent people. And after that, they can call themselves people? He released mana and quickly ran towards the guys. The guy looked at him and thought, he's pretty fast, but his attack style is monotonous. He can handle someone like that without a problem. MC quickly approached and attacked. The guard asked, what? Another guy rushed to attack and shouted, what an idiot. He looked at MC and thought, did he dodge his blow so easily? Ethan grabbed him by the neck and he asked him not to kill him. MC said, he can't even describe how he felt. He was so disgusted. His father and his whole family sacrificed their lives for idiots like him. He will pay for his betrayal and for the murder of his subjects. No one will escape punishment. There was a cry. There is an invader. We need to report to the priest immediately. He ordered everyone to arm themselves and wait for him to appear. He broke through the second block. What a nightmare. Who is this? MC stopped and clutched his sword in his hand, and the guards pointed their crossbows at him and shouted, it's him. Everyone, prepare to fire. Don't move. If they notice anything strange, they will shoot immediately. Ethan looked around and said, what a bright greeting. So, is there anyone else left here? The priest laughed and said, he doesn't think he wants to die a painful death. If he answers questions, he will take pity on him. MC asked again, will he take pity? How funny. Isn't he the same priest who is responsible for distributing the sacred book of the dragon race? The priest asked in surprise, so he knew that this was their territory? Ethan asked again, their territory. He grinned and spoke. He was simply speechless. He released mana and screamed, they worship dragons. How dare he say such things on Ardon territory? He will crush them. Every single one of them. The priest pointed at him and ordered to shoot this bastard. He ordered to leave him alive and find out who he is. Ethan rushed to attack and activated a red flame, a mana strike. It headed towards the guys, who asked in fear, what is that? Did he load the cannon with an arrow with mana? The priest frowned and thought, he also masters sword techniques and controls fire mana. This is no ordinary knight. Wait a minute, is that fire mana? Could he really be Duke Arden? If this is the same Arden, known for his hatred of the dragon race, then everything becomes clear. Nightmare. How could this information leak? Wait, perhaps this meeting will be his chance. He just woke up. If he deals with the Duke, who is only getting in the way, the dragon race will recognize his contribution and reward him. Then he can gain power. The priest released mana and cried out, fire whip, let it appear. He swung it and commanded it to burn. MC dodged and thought, with such a short spell, he was using powerful magic. Could he really use dragon magic as well? Dragon magic. The magic of dragonmen praising dragons with words? That was special. And the best part was that they could use magic without any special spells. This was possible thanks to a clot of mana in their heads, the so-called spiritual word ball. Ethan thought, if he really had this ball, then the Order of Naraxis was connected not only to the shape-shifting Naraxis himself, but also to other dragon races. He moved to the side, and the priest shouted, he's cornered. Everyone attack. Ethan thought, he's much stronger than that dark mage. He needs to deal with him in one blow. The priest shouted, does he think he'll give him time to cast a spell? He activated the fire shackles and ordered the enemy to be bound. Dark stripes bound MC's body, and the priest joyfully said, "He's got it. If he thinks about twitching, his arms and legs will be torn off. He's finished, Duke." Ethan frowned in irritation and said, "What an idiot." He broke the shackles and swung his sword, which frightened the priest. MC said, "He was smart, priest. The Arden clan has one special feature. They can control fire mana, so his pathetic techniques don't work on him." The priest screamed, "What a terrible idiot." He knew it wouldn't be easy to deal with him, but he didn't think it would be this hard. The priest ordered him not to even hope for a peaceful death. He would show him real hell. The cloud giant's aura let it enter the whip. His mana began to spread in different directions, and MC held his sword in front of him. He thought, a strong aura. If he gathers all his power into this, he might be in trouble. The guards rushed to attack, and the priest screamed, "Does he think he'll let him stop him? He won't pass." MC swung his sword and thought, there are enough warriors left. Blood spurted from the priest's mouth, and he said to Look, "This is the power they endowed him with. If he is so confident in himself, let him try to stop it with his vaunted abilities." He created an energy being and ordered it to die. Ethan thought, too late. Nightmare. He didn't want to resort to this method. He released mana from his body and decided to open the double ring. The guards screamed, "What? What a nightmare." It pierced the people's bodies and they screamed in pain. Priest. The second part of the secret technique of breathing black flame, the fiery spear. All the manas clashed, but the MC energy was stronger. The priest thought, it can't be. He summoned such powerful magic with pure force. Energy was directed into his body, and then he screamed loudly. The building suffered considerable damage, and people were scattered to the sides. Ethan approached the priest, who was lying on the floor and coughing. He said he wanted to ask him something. He knows about the group of mages who are part of the order. The priest laughed very loudly, and then asked, does he want to demonstrate his superiority as a winner? He really is Ardon's man. MC said he does not intend to chatter with him in vain. Let him answer his question. The priest covered himself in mana and said, of course. Such a group exists, but he will never in his life be able to know about it. Glory to the great lord. Mana burst from his forehead, and he screamed, and now he will go to the next world with him. Ethan grabbed his head with his hand and blocked the flow of mana, causing the priest to scream loudly. He looked at MC, who took this mana, and asked, but how? He answered, he had seen those before, who tried to do the same, so he drained all the blood magic before blowing himself up. The priest laughed and said, what a monster. But even with such power, he will not succeed. No one from the order will give him an answer, because they all swore an oath to their lord. MC looked at him carefully. A seal appeared above the priest, and Ethan thought it looked like magic to burn someone who divulged secret information. The magic was of a fairly high level. His skills were not enough to undo it. Most likely, it was cast by someone higher than an ordinary priest. His last words, Lord, he will need to find out more about him. After a while, Shimon laughed loudly and said, that stupid Lugon made a fool of himself. Hans, he did a great job. Hans bowed and said, he's exaggerating. Count. Shimon said, he's not exaggerating at all. He's great. Thanks to his information, Lugon was unable to send reinforcements. Most likely, he'll find out about it tomorrow. Hans said how glad he was that he was useful to him. But capturing the castle with the forces the Duke had wasn't that easy. Maybe he used some special method? Shimon replied, everything is obvious. Before that, he had won over the Order of Kargas, hadn't he? With their help, he attacked in the middle of the night. He clicked his tongue and said, so this Romanton turned out to be at the level of some order. Hans's eyes widened in surprise, and he thought, he didn't think he was so mistaken. He had it all figured out. Soon he would start saying that Lawrence also had magical powers. Shimon shouted, Hans! He cried out, yes! Shimon spoke up. He had made a huge contribution to this matter, for which he should be rewarded with status. He appoints him head of intelligence for the county. Hans asked, head of intelligence, isn't this too much responsibility for him? Shimon said, no, he deserved it. He will give him knights. Let him try to find out what the Duke is up to. So can he? Hans picked up a glass of drink and answered, yes, he will do everything in his power. Shimon said, great, then he is asking for a favor. Shimon laughed and thought, now Lugon has no choice but to fight the Duke. As he planned, he'll put pressure on everyone at once, and his factions will defect. He can't wait to hear what he has to say at the elders' meeting. After a while, Lawrence asked, is everything all right, Duke? MC replied, yes, although it's not much. He managed to gather a small harvest. And how was she? Did she get the information? She replied, yes, she got some information about the Order of Neuraxis. First, the Order of Neuraxis operates as an official organization, mainly within the Xenon Empire. MC's eyes widened in surprise and asked, what did she say? Is that accurate? Lawrence replied, yes, that's what it says in the official materials. He'd recently found out about it himself while checking the situation in other lands. Ethan wondered, what's going on? The Xenon Empire had also been attacked by the Dragon race. A peace agreement wasn't enough for them. So now they're recognizing Neuraxis as an official organization? What a nightmare. So the scale goes beyond the duchy. MC ordered Prexian to be summoned here immediately. He's probably far more interested than they are. Currently, the Neuraxis Order is considered sacred ground by the Xenon Empire, with a temple at its center. Their branches are located in 6 kingdoms, excluding Hydern. The Order's main leader is called the Holy Overlord, and each branch is headed by so-called Great Rulers. After a while, Ethan slammed his fist on the table and shouted, damn it! If everything is as he says, Prexian, then the most influential figures on the western continent are in their hands. There are probably branches in Hydern that he just doesn't know about yet. He can be sure of this, since the priest mentioned the Overlord. From that moment on, Arden had another goal: the revival of the lineage, and the extermination of the orders and the dragon race that have spread throughout the kingdom. Prexian said that it was still good that there weren't many hidden orders in Hydern, thanks to the king's restraining policy. MC asked again, was he talking about that incompetent king? Prexian replied, yes, it's hard to believe, but it's true. His Majesty actively opposed the order, which is why Hydern is the only place without an official branch. Ethan said it was quite surprising that he managed to prevent the dragon race from penetrating the kingdom's territory. He thought he was just an incompetent ruler, always looking to the opinion of the 7 great families. In fact, it turned out that he had been protecting the people all this time. Perhaps in Arden's case, he had no other choice due to circumstances. He turned to Prexian and said that from now on he would report to him on the king's policies. Who knows, maybe they'll find it useful. Prexian replied, yes, he obeyed. MC asked, and also could he find out about this? He handed him a badge, and Prexian said it looked like a chest insignia. Ethan replied, yes, the priest had it. He thinks he's somehow connected to an order or a group of mages, and also to Lorson. He asked Lawrence to send this letter to Poforance as soon as possible. At dawn, she asked, does he mean that blacksmith? He urgently needed a weapon? MC sat down in a chair and replied, no, there's something more important. This is just his guess for now. Not only humans but also dwarves may be involved in the order. After a while, Poforance dropped the hammer and opened the letter, his eyes wide with fear. The dwarf looked at him and asked, Poforance, what's wrong with him? Why did he suddenly stop? Poforance ordered Muster to keep an eye on the forge. He threw down his gloves and said he needed to go to the Duke. Muster looked after him and asked what happened. Poforance turned around and said that perhaps the chance for revenge would appear sooner than he thought. After a while, Shimon sat in his office in front of the orb and proposed starting the 33rd meeting of elders. Naturally, the first point of discussion would be the Duke's seizure of Baron Romanton's estate. He also wanted to point out that the head of the Lugon faction learned of this fact later than the others. Lugon clenched his fists and grew angry, and Shimon asked, is the leader so incompetent that the Duke disrespects him and dared to attack? Isn't that so? Everyone remained silent, and he asked, what will he do, Count Lugon? Or will he continue to watch from the sidelines until all his people are killed? Lugon clenched the piece of paper and thought. He thought this Duke had a grudge against Shimon. That's why he dealt with Kargas. But it turns out he simply started with those who look weaker. It's too strange that he was the last to know about this situation. Someone is definitely helping Shimon. He's sure of it. Wait, is Shimon really in cahoots with the Duke? In that case, he stood up and suggested sending a warning letter. Shimon asked, a letter? Lugon answered, exactly. Because of the vassal treaty, they can't attack the Duke, but they can exercise their rights and send a warning so the Duke stops the attacks. Lugon frowned and thought, they'll see who's helping him. He shouted, and they will also notify the king of the ongoing events. Shimon smirked and thought, what a fool. It seems he hasn't figured out what's going on yet. The angry Duke won't be stopped by some lousy piece of paper. It will be good if they clash, and he will take this chance and destroy everyone with the help of his brave knights. After a while, Shimon told Hans to come in. He entered and asked, did the meeting end well, Count? Shimon smiled and replied, yes, he has cornered this Lugon. If the Duke attacks Viscount Lugon, that will be just perfect. Did he find out what the Duke's next target is? Hans replied, so far he hasn't been able to. According to his observations, the Duke attacks those areas where taxes are too high. So how about lowering the taxes to distract him? Shimon frowned in irritation, which frightened Hans. He folded his hands on the table and turned to Hans. He asked if he was being too presumptuous. Hans asked fearfully, would he forgive him? He wondered why the atmosphere had suddenly deteriorated. Shimon said that his job was to monitor the Duke. How dare he tell him to be quieter in front of him so as not to attract attention? Hans bowed and asked the Count to forgive him. He misspoke. Shimon told him not to forget his primary responsibilities. He knows what will happen to him if he fails, right? If he understands, then he can go. Hans asked to be forgiven and left the room. Shimon grabbed his face and thought, it's not that simple. He thinks Lugon has figured out that someone is helping him. The best way to deal with both the Duke and Lugon is to make the third Duke the head of the family as quickly as possible. A few days later, on the training field of Romerton Castle, MC read the letter and said with a smile on his face, a letter with a warning then. It looks like his plan has succeeded. Both factions probably think he's going to attack the West. He gave the letter to Lawrence, and she asked, does this mean he's planning to attack Shimon's faction on the contrary? Ethan asked thoughtfully, Lugon is hiding behind the king. Maybe he should use him for his own purposes too? What does she think? Lawrence replied, she thinks that's a good way. MC asked, has the research on Viscount Dekong's Sacred Book of Dragons, which the merchant mentioned, already been completed? Lawrence replied, yes, she has established all the channels for distributing the book. MC replied, great. Now their duty is to follow the king's policy, which means protecting the dragon race and punishing the Council of Elders. What's up with Hans? Lawrence answered, as she expected. He hinted to Shimon about reducing taxes, but he ignored it. MC said irritably, greedy idiots. They understand perfectly well that the Council of Elders will face punishment, but they still stand their ground. Suddenly a voice was heard from the side. Someone laughed and said, He says funny things. A thief who stole everything that was his. MC quickly began to swing his sword, releasing his mana. Lawrence thought, who is this? How did he get in here? This place is strictly guarded. An image of a girl appeared, who thoughtfully said, how hot. So this is the flame of Arden, which is talked about so much? Lawrence thought, the Duke's attack had no effect. This is not an ordinary warrior. Ethan asked, who is she? The woman answered, for a thief. He is acting too brazenly. She is the owner of the potion that he stole from her. Now does he understand? MC asked again. A thief, she said. Isn't this too rude a statement for someone who broke into someone else's castle? He asks again. Who is she? The woman asked again. Rude? Let him not make her laugh. Who is he calling rude here? A thief. MC looked at her in surprise and said, this is it. The woman held out the test tube and screamed. They will see what he says about this. Ethan thought, this is the special potion he told Jaren about. Special potion, life force essence, lightning stone, metal mana charger. Thanks to these 4 items possessing extraordinary effectiveness, in a past life, humanity was able to resist the dragon race, and the one who invented them was the craftsman mage, Ilya Fizcraft. She clenched the test tube in her hand and smashed it. Ilya said she invented this potion after 5 years of research. She had not gone outside for 10 years, and he had not made a single mistake and was able to reproduce it with precision right away. There is nothing to even think about. How did he manage to steal her potion recipe? Duke Arden. Honestly, even his comments are simply astounding. Lawrence wondered where she suddenly appeared. Apparently she must be Ilya, but that was not certain. Ethan thought perhaps history could have changed, as it had with Lawrence. He needed to check. He asked, what kind of absurd accusations are these? If she had decided to accuse him, she might as well show herself in her true form first. Ilya looked at him questioningly, and MC thought, judging by her past life, this was the surest way. He pointed his sword at Ilya, and said that the Arden clan should not be underestimated. He immediately guessed what kind of tricks she was using. Ilya smirked and said, he has good eyesight. She admits that he is unusual. She covered herself in mana and changed her appearance, and Lawrence asked, is this her true face? MC answered, he thought so. Ilya smiled and said, let him consider it an honor, pup. And now he had better answer her question. She won't be able to take it anymore either. MC thought. He thought it really was Ilya. She showed her face, which he hadn't been able to see even in his past life. In front of him stands a hermit magician who never shows her identity to others. He couldn't miss such a chance. Great, they'll try to take her on the bait. Ilya screamed discontentedly. Let him listen. What's he stuck there for? If he's up to something. Ethan interrupted her and said, a potion that allows you to use monster abilities for a short time. A transformation stone with mana properties. A bead that reduces the wearer's weight. An invisibility cloak that hides even sounds. A crystal ball that shows up to 1,000 years into the future. A bottle that collects water on its own. Ilya screamed. Enough, she thought. What's going on? All these are the items she researched, and even those that are still in the project. There's no way he could have stolen them. How did he know? She asked. How did he know this? Ethan answered. Nothing special. This is a vision of their Arden clan. There is much more besides these. He cannot tell the details to an outsider. Ilya said irritably. She can't listen to this anymore. He wants her to believe this? They're not even mages or alchemists, and he's talking about seeing swordsmen? MC said she might not believe it. She widened her eyes in confusion and asked, what? Ethan replied. She trespassed on someone else's territory and was unfairly accusing him of theft, but instead of punishing her, he answered her question honestly. The guards came running and started asking, did she trespass here? What's going on? Ethan said, she didn't thank him, and now she wants him to worry. Does she believe him or not? Ilya said irritably. She thought, this idiot is definitely lying. Ethan turned around and said, now that she heard the answer, she can leave. He destroyed the training field himself, so he won't charge her for the damage. She looked after him and thought, what an idiot. She released mana, causing him to stop. She continued to spread mana and screamed, what a teenager. How dare he lie to her? You vile idiot. She'll teach him a lesson. Lawrence cried out in fear. Duke. MC thought, this is a domain. One who has reached the highest level in mana control can change the area around him. In the world, this is called the caster's domain. Nightmare. He forgot about it. In her past life, Ilya was a great mage of the 8th level. She decided to act decisively. Ilya asked, what? They can't move. Terrible idiots. MC thought, so they might get hurt. He decided to unleash his power. Ethan released mana and screamed loudly from the strain. Ilya asked, what? She ordered him not to do stupid things. She thought how fast he was. She started chanting a spell and Ethan swung his sword. She blocked and thought, he broke her domain? Who is he? Ilya used offense and defense, as well as impenetrability. She started to attack, but MC created a seal and began to advance along the ground. He thought the damage was too strong. It's still in development, but he released mana and screamed loudly, and Ilya thought, the energy suddenly increased. Could it really be him? Ethan cast a red flame spell, a scorching spear. There was an explosion, and the knight screamed, be careful not to be caught in the explosion. Ethan destroyed Ilya's barrier and pointed his sword at her. He said she would move and his sword would pierce her. A doppelganger. Ilya thought, what's going on? He just used the dragon breathing technique. Is he in league with the dragon race? No, the Duke could have stolen the technique from them, but he's not the type to act in league with them. She asked how he knew she was a doppelganger. Ethan thought, it looks like she doesn't intend to fight anymore. He replied, Just because they are a clan of famous swordsmen doesn't mean they can only swing swords. They are familiar with potion making, as well as techniques that can be useful in combat. Her identity was recognized through one of their abilities. He hopes this answer is enough to dispel all doubts. There is no need to destroy everything here anymore. Lawrence asked Duke, what about her attack on the estate? Ethan turned around and said, it happened because of a misunderstanding, so they will forgive her. He ordered everything to be put in order. Suddenly, he grabbed his chest and began to breathe heavily. He thought it was dangerous, a technique using the breath of the dragon race. Without it, he would not be able to do anything against her. Fortunately, he managed to fully master it without side effects. A loud cry was heard. Let them wait. Ilya stood up and asked, isn't he now waging a war with his relatives? She will help him, but in return, he will tell her. MC interrupted her and said, no need. Ilya's eyes widened in surprise and asked, what did he say? Ethan replied, he said he didn't need her help. He had enough power to defeat them. Ilya screamed, she was an 8th rank archmage, and he was just some 4-star knight. MC said, but he defeated her. She pursed her lips and then screamed, those items he spoke of, she can make not only those, but a ton of others. She laughed slightly and thought, that's it, he'll probably think about it because there's no better craftsman in the world than her. She'll pretend she wants to help him and crush this vision of Ardon or whatever he has. MC said, okay. If that's what she wants, then he'll check if her abilities are useful to him or not. Lawrence, get her room ready. Ilya smirked and thought, he's caught, just like she planned. After a while, Lawrence said, it's here, Miss Ilya. She walked into the room and said, it's not exactly to her taste, but it's livable. Lawrence said, if she needs anything. Ilya interrupted her and screamed, interdimensional pocket. She looked around and said, no worries, everything's here. Lawrence thought the Duke had defeated her so easily that she even forgot that she really was an archmage. Ilya smirked and said, I think it's done. Now the room was habitable. Lawrence looked around and wondered where all those things were placed. Ilya asked, listen, Lawrence, I think she probably knows a lot about the Duke. She wants to find out something about him. Lawrence replied, she herself had only recently met him, so she didn't know much yet. If she wanted to know about him, wouldn't it be better to meet with the lady? Ilya asked again, the lady? Did she mean his sister? Lawrence answered, yes, that's correct. Okay, then maybe she should take the form of the old woman again? Let her take her to her. Lawrence asked to wait. She had heard that doppelgangers could take different forms. She usually took the form of an elderly woman. Ilya replied, exactly, because that was how people showed respect for her age, even though she was half a doppelganger. However, it would be better if she was respected in her natural form. Lawrence replied, that's it. As far as she knew, there was a war going on with the Duke's relatives now, and they were using various data to misinform their opponents. If she remained in the guise of a young girl, no one would suspect her of deception. How about staying like that for a while? Ilya said thoughtfully. That made sense. And was she dressed as a man for the same reason? Lawrence asked again. What? She said, yes. How did she know? Ilya turned around and said, okay. Then she would go to the lady like this. Let her quickly take her to her. After a while, Marie cried out joyfully. She was very pleased, Miss Ilya. She was so young and traveling alone. She hugged Ilya and said she would look after her. Ilya started waving her arms and screaming, does she even know how old she is? Lawrence asked the lady to look after the guest. Ilya screamed. So he deceived her. The scoundrel. She will still deal with him. After a while, in the office, MC said, it's good that he came. Even faster than he thought. Poforance asked how he could be late, since the Duke himself called him. Besides, he could not sit still when he saw this sign. If he does not mind, can he take a look right now? MC handed him the crossbow and said, there were drops of blood on this. Will he recognize it? Poforance began to examine the crossbow and then said, there is exactly the same pattern here. Now he is convinced of it. This is definitely his hand. The royal blacksmith Williams. Could he be in cahoots with the dragon race? Even among the dwarves, this is considered treason. The war with the dragons was devastating for the dwarves too. They lived without any definite rules or system, so they were easy prey for the dragon race. When the invasion began, small villages were unable to respond to the enemy's attacks, and dwarven settlements began to disappear one by one. As a result, many of them died, and their villages were completely destroyed. If not for Arden, now it would be thanks to King Muradni, who founded the country. MC asked to wait and asked, what? Poforance asked, what's wrong with him? Ethan asked. It's surprising, of course, that the dwarves founded a state, but was Muradni its ruler? Some time ago, the dwarves were crying in the streets and screaming loudly. The man closed the dead dwarf's eyes and looked around. Muradni cried out, dear kinsman, let them listen to his words. They managed to avoid a dangerous moment thanks to the help of Duke Ardon, but he cannot guarantee that such a danger will not knock on their door again. They must overcome this disaster together. All dwarves must become one. So the dwarves and humans united under a single flag and created a kingdom. And Muradni, who personally met with each of the 12 clans and made a huge contribution to the unification, became the first king of the dwarves. Poforance said that all this happened while he was unconscious. MC looked at him thoughtfully and thought that it was very unexpected that he became king. But on the other hand, it meant that he was doing well. He smiled slightly. And Poforance said that some dwarves still occasionally go out into the human world, engaging in trade and sending part of their income to build the kingdom. Let them say that they are only interested in money, but for the sake of his people, he is ready to endure even this. MC said that in the past, he had helped his family a lot too. He doesn't know if this will help him, but their Arden clan will also do its part to restore the Dwarven Kingdom. If he can help with anything, they can contact him anytime. Poforance grabbed his face and said that they already owe a lot to the former Duke Arden. Thank him very much. However, what will he do with William? Ethan replied that his behavior now runs counter to the policies of both the Dwarven Kingdom and Hydern. He may be the court blacksmith, but he behaves inappropriately. Poforance asked if he meant that someone more powerful was behind him. Ethan answered yes, and they have power that even the king cannot handle. It will not be easy. If you thoughtlessly accuse William, they will counterattack. Poforance frowned and said that the other dwarves are trying so hard for the kingdom, and this idiot works for their enemies. He is extremely angry. MC asked Poforance to listen. He doesn't want to play for high stakes? Poforance asked again. What? What was he talking about? MC said, revenge and lost glory as well as sacrifice for his people. There's a way to accomplish all of this at once. He'll make him the court blacksmith. Poforance shouted, is that possible? Ethan replied, he's going to do it, if only he agrees. Poforance thanked him for such words, but he doesn't quite understand. After all, no one believed him. Why did he believe in him so much? MC asked if it was really so strange to trust someone with whom he shared an enemy. Poforance, he became his man. Do you need any reason to trust your people? Poforance said he asked a stupid question. He promises that he will do everything for him, Duke. He swears by his hammer. He dedicates his hammer and his loyalty to him. Ethan said, excellent. He gratefully accepts his oath. After a while, MC greeted Marcus Bloten. The Marcus said he was glad to see him, Duke. He thinks this is the first time they communicate like this. Let him address him as he feels comfortable. Ethan said, okay, then he will call him Marcus. Last time he didn't thank him properly for the elixir, and he gave him such a gift. He thanks. Bloten said he was only glad if his gift was useful. Let him accept it as a sign of friendship. He doesn't think he contacted him personally just because of the gift. Maybe something important came up? MC replied, yes, it might be a bit unexpected, but the court blacksmith Hydern is connected to the dragon race, and he suspects that someone very influential is behind him. Bloten's eyes widened in surprise and said, this is truly an unexpected and very serious problem. Does he have any plans for this? Ethan replied, he has a dwarf friend whose abilities far surpass the current one. What does he think about making him the new court blacksmith? Ilya stamped her foot and screamed. Now her abilities will come in handy. Marie stopped her, and she thought, over the past week, she not only learned the Duke's secret, but was also constantly under the princess's supervision. Finally, she had a chance to prove her worth, and a chance to get rid of the princess. MC said that since everyone was here, they could begin. This was a gift from Marquise Bloten. He showed her the armor and said he'd like to make artifacts out of it. Is that possible? Ilya looked at it thoughtfully, and Poforance said, Duke, if he's talking about artifacts. Artifact alchemy is a high technology in which a magical circuit is imbued into armor and weapons. With this, even an ordinary knight can activate magic. Poforance said that this equipment was made of the highest quality mithril. He thought it couldn't be easy to create something like this. His skill was enough to imbue a magical circuit, but this usually requires a skilled mage as an assistant. Ilya screamed loudly. Why was he staring at her with such a bold look? She was that very mage with the highest class skill. And what does assistant mean? He'll do as she says. Poforance pointed a finger at her and asked, Duke, does he really have to work with this girl? MC replied he vouches for Ilya's abilities. Despite her appearance, she is an 8th rank archmage. Ilya, this is her chance to demonstrate her skills. To achieve a good result, they must not quarrel. He expects a lot from this armor. Poforance bowed and said, very well, Duke. If this is his order, despite all her shortcomings, he will try harder to make a better artifact. Poforance screamed, what? Let the Duke not listen to this boor. She will put fantastic magic into this, she thought. And once he is shocked by her abilities, she will reveal Ardon's secret. After a while, they got to work. MC entered the room and asked, so is it going well? Ilya said, welcome, Duke. Ethan asked, doesn't he have to check how it works? Ilya replied, yes, he turned out to be quite a capable fellow. Without wasted movements, he cuts only what is needed. Amazing focus on the task. After a while, Poforance put the tools on the table and shouted, girl, he's done. Now it's her turn. Ilya smirked and told the Duke to wait for the result. She will do what he can't even imagine. After a while, MC examined the sword and swung it thoughtfully. He thought, the sword is light. It was light before, but now it's like a feather. Besides, Ilya interrupted his thoughts and shouted, well, how does he like it? He probably felt himself when he used mana that more than one spell was put into this. In addition to the magic that reduces weight, she also cast sharpness magic on it. Ilya said that she also added the function of magical repair and keeping the sword clean. Plus, she cast magic on the gloves and knee armor that increases compatibility with mana, like Ephrion. Ethan thought, this is even better than he thought. Even with just one of the listed features, it could already be considered a true masterpiece. And Ilya put it all into one thing. However, Ilya said that if this dwarf were more capable, she would have been able to create something better. Poforance shouted in displeasure. What did she say? MC thought that if he let her continue bragging, it would be difficult to deal with her later. He asked thoughtfully, "Is that all?" Ilya shouted. "What?" She laughed and said, "Of course not. This is just the beginning. Now she will show him real magic, so let him try putting mana into all the items at once." Ethan asked again, "All at once?" Ilya said, "Yes, his fire mana. It will be too much for such a weapon, but this is the only way they can check if the mana can withstand it." MC replied, "Okay, he will try." He released mana and lit up the room, so much so that Perforance had to cover his face with his hands. He thought in surprise, amazing. He only recently received the sword from Ephrion, but in that time his skill has grown. MC said nothing is happening. Ilya said, "That's not it. Let him remember what he used during the battle with her. He doesn't need to worry about the weapon. Let him put all his mana into it." Ethan replied, "That's it." He used 8 rings and Dragon's Breath. A loud scream rang out and mana knocked out the windows in the forge. Everything around shook and began to collapse. Ethan carefully looked at the sword and, looking around, said, "This." Ilya stretched her hand forward and shouted, "This is the so-called high thermal conductivity technique she invented. It can distribute part of the equipment's heat and also concentrate it in just one place. It can withstand heat twice as much as this. What about him, the Duke? Let him share his impressions of her abilities quickly." Ethan thought, to be honest, she's amazing. Perforance said she's nothing special. Ilya asked, what did he say? MC thought, he hadn't thought she possessed such strong magic, but he can't just make her the main one. He said, "It's quite passable, not bad." Ilya screamed, "What? Is that all?" MC said, "He tried to, Perforance." He bowed and thanked him. Ilya screamed, "What's wrong with him? That dwarf, he's a loser. Because of him, the effect was weaker than it should have been." Perforance asked discontentedly, "What?" She just praised him. Ethan said, "Enough. Ilya, she's accepted. He'll tell her about Ardon's vision. Will she continue to help him?" Ilya looked at him happily, and then screamed, "Excellent. But he must definitely keep his promise." After some time, Lawrence said, Perforance left with a letter for the capital. He will get there within 3 days and meet with Marquis Blotton. MC asked, "What's up with the king?" She replied, "They've completed all the preparatory work anonymously. The inspection will begin before the meeting with the ruler." Ethan said, "Well done." He thought everything was ready. He gathered himself and headed toward the exit, where his subordinates were already waiting. Manhattan placed his hand on his chest and announced that 40 knights from the Order of Arden were ready to leave. A knight blew his horn, and a cry rang out, "Knights, they are advancing!" MC rode his horse into the square and looked around. There was too much shouting around the fortress. The commander came out of the room and began shouting angrily, "What army? Where did this come from?" His subordinate held a spyglass, and the commander shouted, "Can you find out where they are?" He glanced through it and realized he saw the Arden flag, and exclaimed, for it was Ethan himself on horseback. He confidently approached his goal, and suddenly, Manhattan's horse stopped. He began shouting to the Lytton guards that Duke Ethan was coming. Viscount Lytton will answer for collecting excessive taxes and exceeding his authority. He must also answer for distributing dragon race books throughout Arden lands. They must open the gates now. The knights were waiting, and the commander realized there were more than 30 knights there. He shouted to the others to wait, as order must be maintained before the gates can be opened. At that moment, he turned to his subordinate and asked, "Have you contacted the Viscount?" He held the magic ball in his hand and replied, frightened and hastily, that he hadn't succeeded yet. At that moment, the commander shouted at him to hurry, as they were running out of time, and he agreed. Suddenly, the protagonist soared incredibly high above them and glared menacingly at his target, then landed, and most of the fortress shattered into tiny bricks. The knight dropped the magic ball, which rolled to the side. Viscount Lytton was there, calmly shouting, "What happened?" The commander began coughing loudly, but rose from his knees as his subordinate reached for the ball, declaring that they had a problem. "The Grand Duke is here." The commander began shouting to his men to take up positions, and they were to attack the Duke. He pointed his finger at Ethan and continued shouting for the others to immediately take up their positions and charge. The frightened knights didn't know what to do, and the commander ordered them to draw their swords from their sheaths. They could defeat him if they united. Ethan watched in disbelief, wondering why they didn't have an ominous aura. Had they raised their swords because they were ordered to? The fastest way to fight was to weaken their morale. A smile appeared on his face, and Ethan used his 8 rings technique. A fireball appeared in his chest, and this sphere began to spread everywhere. The commander, unsure of what it was, shouted about it as a strong wind rose all around. The knights gaped in shock, watching the dark magical forces they saw above them. Suddenly, the commander realized he had actually cast the sphere spell. At that moment, one of the knights took a step and fell to his knees, dropping his sword, followed by the others. These knights lay on the ground, while Ethan strode confidently among them, heading straight for the commander. The knights below the fortress looked up, wondering what was going on up there. It simply couldn't be. He, a 5-star knight, had fallen under the influence of the sphere? Could it really be true? He began screaming in terror and charged straight at the protagonist, who used his magical powers to easily parry the attack with just one hand. He smiled and looked confidently at his opponent, who was incredibly terrified when he noticed his sword had been shattered into tiny pieces. He screamed, "What's going on?" At that moment, Ethan covered his face with his magical hand and threw him aside, slamming his back into the ground. Then he turned to the other knights and ordered them to listen to him. He does not fight with those who do not feel hostility towards him, and he came to prove this, not to them, but to Viscount Lytton. He is the true master of these lands and orders them to open the gates immediately. At that moment, Lytton managed to contact Shimon via the crystal ball. He started shouting in surprise. What was he talking about? Lytton kept shouting. How many times did he have to repeat himself? The Duke had passed the fortress's outskirts and was now heading here. Didn't he say his abilities were at the level of 2 or 3 stars? But he knocked down its commander, a 5-star knight. Shimon asked him to elaborate, and he replied that, although it was only briefly, he had clearly seen the Duke swooping down from above through the crystal ball, and then the connection was lost. Where had they seen a 2-star knight leap in the air like that? Shimon was incredibly frightened and asked him in a daze, what did he just say? He covered his mouth with his hand, and after a brief silence, asked him to calm down. After all, the information about his low mana was reliable. Did he check why he had broken into the fortress? Lytton replied that it was because of tax issues and the dragon book. Shimon replied, that's it, let him hold out as long as possible first, and he'll send reinforcements immediately. Lytton replied that he didn't know how long they could hold out, so they were asking him to hurry, and at that moment, the connection was lost. He realized that the Duke's abilities differed from the information he'd received. Something was clearly wrong here, as if everything was spiraling out of control. Or had something happened that he couldn't even imagine? First, he needed time. Had he mentioned taxes and books? In that case, they needed to distract the Duke at Lugon by any means necessary. He gritted his teeth in anger and realized that even if they had to give up something, they would still have to do it. At that moment, Commander Lowenson entered the room and asked, did he summon him, Count? Shimon replied that he'd been informed that the Duke had attacked Lytton's knights and that he should send reinforcements there. Lowenson replied that he understood, and at that moment Shimon stopped him and asked them to move slowly so as not to run into the Duke. At that moment, Lowenson understood what was being said and, smiling, replied that the order had been accepted. A short time later, Lawrence arrived to Ethan and expressed surprise at how quickly he'd figured it out. It was actually astonishing. Ethan replied that nothing of the sort had happened, he'd simply opened the outer gates. Most likely, the main forces inside the palace were with the Viscount. He turned around and asked if everything was going according to plan. Lawrence replied that it was ongoing and that he could begin retreating. At that moment, Ethan turned to Menharten, who had immediately arrived. The protagonist asked him to leave a few soldiers behind to oversee the guards and reorganize the forces. They should also follow him. Menharten replied that he was obeying this order, and at that moment, Ethan mounted his horse and declared that everything was fine and that they should go inside. At that moment, many people inside the fortress were going about their normal lives, and suddenly, one of the guys rose above them onto the stage and started shouting, did they hear what's going on? Duke Ethan had finally arrived to put an end to Lytton's tyranny. It was time for the great hero to draw his sword to defend them. One of the men in the crowd began shouting, yes, he can't bear this hunger any longer. Another man joined him and shouted, he too. They must all go to the Archduke. Many people supported this idea and shouted, yes, they will all go together. When the crowd was so excited, Ethan appeared right behind them and saw it all. He was pleased that so many people had gathered there in such a short time. They had merely fanned the smoldering flames, and there were many complaints. News about him had spread even without her participation, saying that Kargas and Lytton were living in luxury like in the old days. At that moment, the bald man who had stirred up the crowd stood on the stage and saw Ethan himself behind the ordinary citizens. He extended his hand toward him and shouted, the Archduke is finally here. He greets him with joy. At that moment, the main character began to approach them, and the crowd parted to let him onto the stage. They turned to look at him, asking if it really was him. Ethan took the stage and spoke. Citizens of Demorian, their city used to be like paradise, but after the war, they followed their lords and made them suffer, so he will punish Viscount Lytton. He raised his hand, then shouted that he himself would rule this city, and shouted for the knights to draw their swords at once. At that moment, the people began to shout with joy and support their new ruler. They continued to rejoice, looking out of every window to cheer him on. After a while, evening fell, and the vibrant colors of the sunset were visible in the sky. The knights on the fortress began to discuss the new news among themselves. Apparently, the Archduke and Ethan had captured the outer part of a castle. Another knight asked again, is that why they're on alert? Another knight replied that, from what he'd heard, he'd already captured 2 territories. But how could he have done that if he'd recently emerged from a coma? At that moment, the young man froze, staring ahead and asking him to stop. The knights looked into the distance together and realized who the people in front of them were. It was Ethan and Menharten themselves, followed by ordinary townspeople. One of the knights shouted at everyone to remain calm and remain where they were. Messengers were to report immediately to the Viscount of what was happening. The townspeople held torches and made their way through the fortress. At that moment, Lytton himself saw everything happening through a magical crystal ball and was dumbfounded, then shouted, what's going on? Was the Archduke really attacking them along with the townspeople? He ran out of his chambers, wondering what the hell was going on. Why had the civilians suddenly rebelled? One of the commanders among his knights shouted at the men not to panic, because they were rebels. Since they had come with fire, They should light their arrows immediately. The men turned around, frightened and unsure of what to do, whereupon the knight grabbed one of them by the throat and shouted, "Is he really disobeying orders? He should prepare the fire immediately." The boy trembled and muttered that he couldn't do this because his family was there. Tears streamed down his face, and the commander swung his fist at him, shouting that he would kill him if he disobeyed. At that moment, Ethan became enraged by such actions and shouted at him to stop immediately. The commander, along with his knights, clutched his head from the incredible scream, and Ethan continued to shout at him to stop. The surrounding people watched what was happening along with Manhwa, and at that moment, Lytton heard a terrible thunderclap and asked again, "What is that?" Ethan continued to shout at Lytton to stop torturing innocent citizens, and that it was time for him to open the gates and answer for his sins. Lytton shouted back that this was nonsense. He had no right to do this. What were they doing? They should destroy the enemy immediately. He shouted at the captain to kill all the rebels, and the knight turned to him in bewilderment, then shouted, "Kill everyone who disobeys." The knight drew his sword and asked the others, "Have they heard about this? They should use fire immediately." The man continued to sob and shout that he couldn't attack his family, at which point the knight swung his sword at him and asked, "Is he still doing this?" But he couldn't strike the man, as Ethan intervened and struck him with a magical wave. The knight fell to the ground, clutching his head, while his subordinates looked on. Ethan raised his fingers, and a multitude of magical beams appeared around him. The captain was dumbfounded when he noticed this, and realized it was a fiery finger of mana. What was this incredible speed? The soldiers didn't even understand what had happened, and how was he able to hit his opponent so accurately from such a distance? At that moment, the protagonist approached them, used an air jump, and pushed off from the weightlessness to attack his opponents. At that moment, Lytton began to scream in fear. So that's how he'd leaped over the walls of the outer palace? When Ethan landed in front of the knights, who were already reluctant to fight them, he lowered his gaze, and a moment later, pointed his sword at Lytton himself. He cried out in fear and trembled. Ethan addressed him by name and said that he refused to surrender, but not to think he would be kind to the strong. At that moment, he raised his sword and was completely enveloped in magic. The commander, standing nearby, looked at the sword with curiosity and wondered if Ethan's flames were red, not black. Otherwise, everyone would have died immediately upon seeing them. But he had a chance to defeat him. At that moment, the commander grabbed his sword and decided to pounce on Ethan. As long as the flames weren't black, there was no guarantee of victory, so he had no problem either. He extended his sword and shouted, "Guys, attack from all sides and defeat the Archduke." They exclaimed, "Yes, sir," and rushed at Ethan from all directions. It was a four-pronged attack, and the protagonist turned to look around, then took a step to the side, and with one deft movement of his hand, deflected the attack. The commander realized he had used sword techniques to fend off the attack, and Ethan looked confidently ahead, when suddenly a questioning expression appeared on his face. Unsure what was happening to him, their stances were quite strange. The commander stared at him in horror as a magical monster appeared above him. At that moment, Ethan blurted out, "Did they really teach the Knights Dragon Clan techniques?" The captain was dumbfounded, then began shouting, "What is he talking about? This is complete nonsense." At that moment, the man behind him tensed up. Ethan said that they had combined human sword techniques and could have warded off someone else, but not him. This is the Dragon Clan's stance, the Destruction Dragon. He taught them this even though he knew there were side effects to dragon breathing and fencing techniques. At that moment, all the attackers felt sick and were frozen with horror. One of the knights asked in fear, "Is this really true? What side effects could there be? Did they really teach them dragon techniques?" At that moment, Lytton angrily shouted, "Enough of this nonsense," and they should ignore his words since he was trying to deceive them. Ethan replied that this was very cruel, and he thought only 4 of them didn't know about it. The captain began shouting at him to shut up, and for the other knights not to listen. Ethan continued to say that forcing knights to learn techniques with side effects for their own gain was terrible, so it was even worse than he thought. At that moment, he used his magical powers to attack the enemy with a solar sword blast. Ethan moved closer to one of the knights and struck him with a similar attack. When their swords touched, the knight flew to the side in exhaustion and loudly cleared his throat. The surrounding knights were stunned by what they saw, unsure what was happening. Their swords had simply crossed, but an explosion occurred. The captain was also perplexed by what he should do now, and Ethan continued to hold his enormous sword, declaring that he saw how they were acting, and that he could conclude that the 4 of them were in league with the dragons. At that moment, the captain realized his situation and cried out in horror. How could he even think of opposing such a technique? He shouted to his subordinates that their enemy was alone and that they should surround him together. Ethan grinned and asked again, "He wants to surround him?" At that moment, he disappeared from his position, and the men were stunned by what they saw. The captain began shouting that this was terrible, that he was about to lower the gates. They had to stop him. The knights rushed after Ethan, who turned with a confident expression and declared that they had fallen into his trap. At that moment, he attacked each of the knights, causing them to be caught in a fiery explosion. The captain, realizing their situation, exclaimed, "What?" He shouted the names of these men, and Ethan asked again, Did he really mean to attack from behind? They were still far from being true knights. At that moment, he broke the heavy chain with one easy movement, thus raising the gates to let his men in. Manhwa noticed this, and shouted that the Archduke had opened the gates, and that the knights should run forward. They must help him. In addition to the knights, even the townspeople rushed inside the fortress with incredible cries and joy. The Viscount turned green with horror and didn't know what to do. He silently watched the events unfold. Panicked, the captain shouted at the knights to stop them. The soldiers should deal with the townspeople. They should hold out no matter what, and he himself would stop the Archduke. But as soon as he finished speaking, Ethan appeared right in front of him and unleashed his fire wave. The captain tried to shield himself with his hand, but the magical wave was so powerful that he was thrown to the side and fell, coughing. He didn't know what to do or how to react. The captain gritted his teeth in anger and thought about how he'd struck down 5 leveled knights with a single blow. And even he, at level 6, couldn't stand up to him. Now he understood how Kargas and Lumenton must have felt. Luton was incredibly frightened and realized the Archduke had dealt with them single-handedly. He'd previously concealed his strength. At that moment, he fell to the floor in sheer terror. Meanwhile, Manhwa shouted for the knights to attack, as the enemy was giving way. Ethan continued to fight the captain, who still held out, but moments later, a throng of townspeople overwhelmed the knights and stormed the palace, screaming as they advanced. Night fell shortly afterward, and at that moment, Jiran introduced his father to the man the Archduke had recommended. It was Perforance, who greeted his new acquaintances. Jiran's father chuckled and said he was pleased to meet the finest blacksmith. He then suggested they move on. They had much preparation to do before the council meeting with the emperor. As they entered the next room, a magical portal appeared. The man warned them that it might make them a little dizzy, after which they both entered. Finding themselves in the portal, they clenched their teeth in tension, after which Perforance's eyes and mouth opened in surprise. He saw a huge palace right before him. The Marquis welcomed him to the capital of the Hydern Empire, Parantium. Now he offers to make him a blacksmith for the imperial family. Perforance was still unable to escape the magnificent views and gazed around him in dazzle. Meanwhile, in the fortress, many knights were routed, and Leighton, observing the events, began hiding behind the columns. The captain was still struggling with the protagonist and shouted, "Technique, Form 10. He pounced on Ethan with this spell, who was confident and fully prepared. His red magical powers spread everywhere. So with one deft move, he again destroyed the captain's attack. Ethan said that he saw that the captain was confident in the speed of his attacks, in which case he would show him Ethan's attack. At that moment, he unlocked the 8th ring and cast the solar spell Prominence. A bright beam of light and an explosive attack were directed at the stunned captain, who began screaming loudly in fear. And moments later, a bright flame exploded. The surrounding people were dumbfounded by what they saw and stopped attacking for a moment. They all watched silently, and when the dust from the devastation cleared, the captain lay motionless on the broken ground. Ethan looked confidently ahead and shouted that he intended to send his subordinates to fight in his place. Leighton, if he was a true knight, he should end this. Leighton continued to hide behind the columns and trembled with fear. He kept telling Ethan to shut up because he had done nothing wrong. Why should he be held accountable for this? Ethan glared at him horrifiedly and called him a coward because he didn't deserve to be an aristocrat. At that moment, he used an air jump and a second later found himself opposite Leighton, who began to back away. Ethan moved closer and shouted that he should be ashamed of his actions, after which he kicked him right in the chest. He began coughing loudly from the blow and lay motionless in another room. Ethan exhaled, then shouted loudly that Leighton had fallen. Everyone must lower their weapons. The battle was over, and Manhwa shouted to his subordinates to surrender immediately. They would attack anyone who did not lower their weapons, and they should surrender. After these words, all the knights dropped their weapons, and Ethan shouted that from now on, the Viscount was under Ethan's control. The people joyfully shouted, "Long live the Archduke! How wonderful!" Ethan confidently looked ahead and observed the unfolding actions of the people. Sometime later, urgent news appeared for Count Shimon. Shimon asked again, "Vice Captain, he should be on a mission. What happened?" He replied that Viscount Leighton had fallen. At that moment, Shimon was stunned by what he heard and asked again, "What? Had the palace really been captured in just 2 days? Had Leighton surrendered?" Greg replied no. They had interrogated the escaped soldiers. The Archduke's knights had opened the inner gates and won the battle with the help of the townspeople. He replied that everything was clear and he would hear a detailed report on this later. Greg replied that he understood everything, and Shimon looked into the distance, lost in thought. He angrily squeezed the paper in his hand and recounted that Leighton had a 6th-level knight captain and 4 5th-level knights. If, despite this, the Archduke had managed to open the inner gates, that could mean he was almost at level 6. It hadn't been even half a year since he awakened, so it was almost impossible to believe. He turned to Captain Lowenson and asked if he thought the 1st Division would be able to defeat the Archduke. The 1st Division is the most elite knight of the county's 100 knights. They are Count Shimon's secret weapon, and they have mastered the techniques of the dragon race, so they have no choice but to remain in the shadows. The Archduke is likely only level 6. A 6th-level rookie is very different from veterans. Lowenson added that they are professional knights who will soon reach level 7. and there are 12 of them, including himself and the vice-captain, so they shouldn't have any problems. 2 knights and the first division are enough to defeat the Archduke. Shimon thoughtfully replied, okay, then he'll use this Archduke a little longer, and have him tell the butler to reduce taxes and stop distributing the new dragon book. Lowenson replied that he understood everything, and would also convey this to the families in the faction. Shimon asked him to ensure everything remains a secret, as it was important to them that Lugon never find out about this. Lowenson grinned and replied that he would do everything. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Manhattan began restoring order in the fortress. Ethan stacked all the documents and reported that they had succeeded in their work. Did Lawrence need anything else? She replied that, with the expansion of his territory, there were more workers and supplies, so they had no problems. He had already reclaimed most of the duchy's southern region, and if he captured another fief, he could implement his plan to divide the duchy into 3 parts for a war of influence. Shimon would soon try to contact him, and then he could use him as a shield to attack Viscount Lugon's faction. Perhaps he believed they were cooperating with Shimon and would not act rashly. Ethan remarked that this was rather foolish, since they most likely believed he was acting blinded by rage. They were oblivious to the reality of what was happening, preoccupied with the war and the faction. He left it to her. Let Lawrence make them think so before the Enlightenment ceremony. She bowed and replied, okay. Sometime before the incident, Lytton had picked up the documents while the captain was waiting. He said this was the next day's tax collection area. Suddenly, they looked at each other questioningly and saw a magical crystal ball. They both gaped in shock, wondering what was going on. A man in a veiled robe emerged from this magical ball. The captain began shouting, "Who is it?" The stranger held out his hand and announced that he had appeared early, so they would know he was coming. Did he surprise them? The captain began shouting that he was a freak, that he was doing here in the middle of the night. It was the mage the 5th level knight hadn't sensed, so Lytton knew things were bad. He suddenly tried to stop the captain, who had begun attacking the unknown character, shouting that he would grab him right now. Suddenly, the man smiled and looked him in the eyes with a magical light, and the captain froze and couldn't move. Lytton realized this was the veiled area, and was dumbfounded by what was happening. At that moment, the man held a knife to the captain's throat, who continued to shout, "Who is he? What does he want from them?" He kept saying he should calm down, because he was there to negotiate. He needed to know the Duke's secret. It looked like he'd been extorting money from many people. After these words, Lytton was dumbfounded and asked, "What's wrong with that?" Maybe he was an assassin hired by the Lugon faction, driven mad by this. The man grinned and asked if he wanted to become stronger. He handed him a magic sphere. When Lytton found himself in a prison cell, he announced that his power was more staggering than his territory. He felt that if he didn't accept his offer, he would kill them on the spot. This meant they had accepted the Dragon Clan's texts, and their knights had gained great power. Ethan replied that the dragon technique had side effects. Didn't he feel guilty for deceiving his subordinates? He smirked and replied that even in the duchy where dragons are hated most, many people have already learned their techniques. Ethan tensed at these words, and Lytton continued, "What did he think other regions would do? They simply followed the general trend." At this point, Ethan became extremely angry and clenched his fist, then said that he understood everything, and now he must tell about the mage who appeared before them that night. Let him tell the organization he belonged to. At that moment, Lytton began to shake in fear, but Ethan grabbed him by the neck and pinned him to the wall. He began coughing. Ethan said he was a coward, and as soon as he was in danger, he reversed his attitude. Was this really the right time to test him? Lytton continued coughing, then shouted that if he spoke about this, not only would he be in danger, but his family as well. He lifted him up by the neck and scolded him for being a stupid idiot. Why did he think he was asking about them? If he told them, he would be forgiven for getting rid of them, and then his family would be safe. He exclaimed and said, "Okay," after which Ethan threw him straight into the wall. He hit his head and back, and remembered the magician, which led him to reveal that the magician who had come that night was a go-between. He told him to go to the Viscounty of Delgorn to find someone with such a sign. It was a special sign, and Ethan realized the situation and was dumbfounded. Sometime later, many subordinates were waiting at the table for their ruler. They were confused as to why strangers were in the office. When the king arrived at his throne, he asked again, "Is everyone here?" Before the meeting began, he noticed a new member. Could he please introduce himself? It was Poference, who announced that he was present at Archduke Ethan's seat. He bowed and announced that he had received a letter from him. At that moment, the people at the table began to mutter and discuss the situation. Was he sending the dwarves for a specific reason? A servant of the king whispered some information in his ear, and he asked, "Is this true?" A certain document appeared in his hands, and he read it carefully, then grinned and said it was interesting. It stated that the royal blacksmith was collaborating with the dragon tribe. Everyone around him was stunned by what they heard, and didn't know how to react. At that moment, the king cleared his throat, crumpled the papers in his fist, and the Marquis realized the emperor was extremely uncomfortable. Was this because one of his subordinates was connected to dragons? Or was there another reason? Perhaps because he himself was collaborating with them. At that moment, he continued to ponder what was happening, and Poference turned to him and looked at him silently. Meanwhile, Ethan became curious. He must be in the palace right now. He leafed through the papers and thought that the preparations concerning the Viscount were perfect. Now it was time for them to begin the matter of the dragon race. Suddenly, he heard footsteps approaching his office. It was Ilya who had shouted, "Archduke." She had succeeded in developing what he had asked of her. Now she held a well-rounded whetstone in her hands. For this, he could sharpen his sword anywhere. Ethan was displeased that she hadn't knocked on his door or answered. She approached him closely and began shouting angrily. Was he listening to her? He pretended to read documents and didn't answer, prompting Ilya to also look at his papers and see. Molasses? That curmudgeon? That weirdo? Ethan asked in surprise. Did she really know him? She replied, of course, she knows a lot about paperwork. Was he really looking for that old weirdo? Ethan said yes in bewilderment, after which Ilya became embarrassed and said that she was very busy, but if he begged her, she could help him. Ethan continued to look at her in bewilderment.